Hello everyone, this is part 1 of What If Deku Married Mina, and this story is made by 12 Angry Men, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
It was a warm summer evening as the sun set over UA High School. Students trickled out of the gates as their classes wrapped up for the day. For many, such as those in the Hero program, today marked the end of finals for the semester. Some were cheering as they left, celebrating their freedom from the work. Others simply looked exhausted, eager to get home and collapse into bed. Regardless, one thing was for sure, the end of finals had put everyone's mind at ease. Well, almost everyone. Mina Ashido sat alone in the famous, or infamous, depending on who you asked, CL Room 1A. She was slumped forward in her seat slightly, her head tilted down so she was staring at her desk. It was certainly an odd sight. The pink hero in training was known for being one of the first students out of the CL room once the bell rang. Yet here she was, sitting like a statue as her peers were all heading home for the day. The only reason she hadn't been kicked out was there hadn't actually been CL in the homeroom today, their practical exams were held in another part of the building. The exam that Mina had failed. The reason she was sitting here, staring at a blank desk with an equally blank expression on her face. Another oddity in her behavior. Everyone knew Mina was possibly the most expressive, emotional student in the CL. Happy, sad, angry, everyone knew whatever she was feeling. But right now, her expression was unreadable. Devoid of any kind of emotion. She had lost track of how long she'd sat here, staring at her desk like it was the most fascinating thing in the world. She didn't really care either. Her mind was entirely focused on the exam she had failed just a little while ago. Spectacularly failed at that. There may not have been a more total failure in the history of this school, she reckoned. Oh sure, Kirishima and Sato had also failed, but they at least looked like that came somewhat close. They didn't just spend the whole test running like an idiot, never even seeing their opponent. They at least had a plan, as bullheaded as it was. Mina and Kaminari on the other hand looked downright pathetic. Not that Mina blamed her partner, his quirk was simply not well suited for the task they had. See, it wasn't just the fact that Mina had failed the exam that was making her feel so horrible. Oh, it certainly played a part, because it meant she was no longer going to the training camp she had been looking forward to. It also meant she was going to have a very fun conversation at home tonight. But she could move past all that. No, it was seeing everyone else's performance in the finals that was making her feel like she was about to vomit. Todoroki and Yaoyorozu, Tsuyu and Tokiyami, Koda and Jiro, everyone had performed spectacularly. Their strategy, teamwork, and technique had led them all to victory against their teachers one way or another. Even Mineta showed some resolve for once in his life. And Mina was happy for all of them, ecstatic even. Seeing how much her clemates had improved over the semester was incredible. But it also showed just how far Mina had fallen behind. Mina Ashido, ranked 19 out of 20 students, and frankly, based on how much more quickly Kaminari had grasped topics during the group study sessions at Yaoyorozu's, she was beginning to suspect this exam might push her to 20. Mina Ashido, the student who held the record for after-school detention with Mr. Aizawa. Mina Ashido, the girl who was beginning to question just what it was she was doing here. Seriously, what am I doing here? ? The horned girl let out a sigh. This exam had been one hell of a wake-up call, that was for sure. She was at the finest school in the country for heroes, and yet one semester later she felt like she hadn't improved in the slightest. Oh, sure she survived the villain attack at the USJ, but that was because of everyone else. In fact, she was pretty certain she was the only one who hadn't fought. And while it was true she placed quite high at the sports festival, it was mostly because she rode on the coattails of Bakugo to the top 16, and just so happened to go against the one guy whose weakness she knew perfectly in the first round. Other than that ? A long list of failed assignments, contests, and of course exams. Slacking off at arcades instead of doing work. Hanging out with her hard-working clemates instead of catching up on stews, pretending like she belonged here. Yeah, pretending. Reflecting on all of this as she sat here, Mina had begun to suspect that UA was not the place for her. This was a prestigious school for the best of the best, and while her acid quirk was certainly powerful, she was hardly an exemplary student. This disaster of a final was a clear indicator of that. Letting out another sigh, Mina placed her elbows on the desk and let her face sink into her hands. She might have started crying, but she had done enough of that today. She didn't even feel that sad anyway, just disappointed, really. Disappointed in herself. She didn't move her hands when she heard the door open and shut, nor did she move them when she heard the footsteps slowly approach her. She finally moved them as a timid male voice spoke, one she immediately recognized. Ashido ? The concern in his voice was obvious. She slowly turned her head up to look at the source of the voice, her expression not changing. Midoriya. A few minutes earlier, Izuku Midoriya let out a yawn as he walked down the halls of UA, eager to get home. He loved this school, and was grateful every single day that he had gotten the chance to come here, but these finals had taken a lot out of him. It was bad enough that he had to work with his friend-turned-bully and fighter teacher, but when said teacher was All Might ? Even with those training weights it was an absurd. It was one of the many times he found himself questioning the teaching's methods of this school. Still, this place was the best for a reason, and he had ultimately prevailed. Somehow, he and Kaken had successfully worked together to overcome All Might and P. It made him realize just how much he had grown since starting here. How much he had gotten control over One for All, though he obviously had a long way to go before truly making it his own. He couldn't help but be a little proud of himself, a rare feeling for the quirk inheritor. But as always, he quickly found himself thinking of other more than himself. Not everyone had been as fortunate as him. 4 of his classmates had failed the practical final, which meant they wouldn't be attending the training retreat. Kirishima, Sato, Kaminari, Ashido, he could only imagine how they were feeling. Ashido, his mind drifted back to when he first returned from his test. Everyone had watched and were all waiting to congratulate him, even the ones that hadn't paid their own tests. But while they were happy for him, they couldn't completely hide how upset they were about their own results. Ashido had stood out in particular to Izuku because he just wasn't used to seeing her look so down. She almost always had a smile on her face, typically having a very brief but comedically exaggerated reaction if something had actually upset her. This was different though. She was clearly trying to hide it, but Izuku could tell something was off. He had wanted to say something, but before he had a chance he was instructed to go down to the nurse's office. Izuku stroked his chin as he thought about this out loud. Fortunately, the hallway was empty so nobody was around to hear his trademark mumbling. By the time he had gotten out of the nurse's office, everyone else in his CL had left for home, and he was looking forward to doing the same. As the formerly quirkless boy ped by his homeroom, a sudden flash of pink in the corner of his eye snapped him out of his rambling. He backed up a few steps to look through the door window. The source of said pink flash was none other than Mina Ashido. What's she doing in there ? The student's eyes widened a bit as he got a better look at his classmate. He had noticed something off about her before, but this was. He almost didn't recognize her. Any of her usual energy was completely gone. Her face looked devoid of any kind of emotion as she sat completely motionless at her seat, slumped forward with her head tilted down. No crying, no anger, just nothing. It kind of scared Izuku. How long has she been here ? He muttered as he stared at the acid user. After several seconds, she suddenly moved as he placed her elbows on the desk and raised up her arms, letting her face fall into hands. Izuku grimaced a bit as he realized he started to recognize her unusual behavior. The look, the body language, everything about her demeanor was all too familiar to him. This was the look of someone who felt completely defeated. Someone who was giving up. Izuku was very well acquainted with that feeling. Whether it was the day he found out he wasn't going to get a quirk, or at the times in middle school where he would succumb to his classmates' jeering, or when the more cynical All Might he first met had told him becoming a hero would be impossible without a quirk, he had dealt with it more times than he could count. It was something he never wanted to experience again, and seeing someone else, especially someone like Mina, going through that torment. Izuku's hands balled into fists. He couldn't stand to see her like this. The door creaked as the green-haired boy opened it, shutting it behind him as he entered the room. He had never said more than a few words to Mina since he met her, but that didn't matter right now. She didn't look up as he approached her desk. Ashido ? He called out. The horned girl seemed to respond to this as he slowly lifted her head up to him. Midoriya. Much like her expression, Mina's voice was lacking its usual energy and bubbliness. She didn't say anything else as she stared blankly at him. What are you doing in here? Minushal is over why you know, Izuku stammered as he spoke, not entirely sure what the best thing to say right now was. Plus, he still was a little uneasy talking to girls. Oh. There was a brief silence as the two continued to stare at each other. Is everything alright? Izuku obviously knew the answer, but he needed to say something. Yep. Another one-word answer. Are you sure? This time Mina shut her eyes, breathing in a bit. Yes, I'm sure. Everything's fine Midoriya. There was a hint of irritation in her voice, another emotion Izuku didn't usually hear from Mina. He backed up a step, raising his hands slightly. What the one-for-all inheritor didn't realize was that he was one of the last people Mina wanted to see right now. Out of all of the exams, his was the one that had truly made her realize just how behind she had fallen. Midoriya and Bakugo, possibly the two most incompatible students in the CL, up against the top hero in the entire world. An impossible task, right? Well, somehow, some way, they had done the impossible. Bakugo and Midoriya, the two students who were clearly enemies before they had come to UA, managed to put aside whatever problems they had and work together to win against All Might. Freaking All Might. And this was the same guy who placed last in the initial quirk test at the start of the year. The guy who couldn't use his power without shattering his limbs. Now he was one of the best in the CL, capable of going toe-to-toe with the juggernaut that was All Might, even if he was handicapped. Just thinking about it made her pissed off. Not at it Midoriya, but at herself. Look, if you want to talk about the exam, this guy really didn't know when to back off. I said I was fine, okay. ? Mina shouted as she suddenly leapt to her feet. Izuku jumped back at this, raising his hands up even more. What, you think I'm upset about failing this stupid test and not going to this stupid retreat? ? Her hands were balled into fists, arms shaking slightly as she yelled at her classmate. Izuku simply stared, wide-eyed at the sudden outburst of emotion. After a few more seconds, Mina sighed, relaxing slightly as she shut her eyes. This wasn't his fault. She shouldn't be lashing out at him like this. I'm sorry. Her voice was much lower now. I'm just, another sigh. Izuku slowly lowered his hands. I know you're just trying to help. That's what you do, right? She put on a smile. A sad, forced smile. Always butting into people's business whether they want you to or not. Always helping everyone out. Always striving to be the best hero you can be. Izuku blinked in confusion, unsure where she was going with this. Seriously, Amashingung, how strong you've gotten. How strong everyone's gotten. It's been one hell of a semester, hasn't it? Her smile drooped a bit as she looked down. Izuku was starting to put it together. Why, you've gotten way stronger too, Ashido, he started to say. She held up a hand as he was about to continue, shaking her head. Come on, Midoriya, you saw me out there right? She let out a soft, hollow laugh. Couldn't even find my opponent. Spend the whole damn thing running like an idiot. Some hero I am, Her smile was getting less and less convincing. That's me, bottom of the barrel of CL1A, right? It wasn't just the exam, Izuku realized. He knew Mina was struggling with academics in general, but it never seemed to bother her that much. But it seemed the practical had changed that. Look, Ashido, you were incredible. She wasn't listening to him at this point. Seriously, you managed to get your weird quirk under control, and get Bakugo to work together with you. And you beat All Might. She patted him on the shoulder, which made him tense up a bit. You're a Amashingung. You really do belong at this school. She began to walk past him, making her way for the door. Izuku stood in place as she left. I belong here, he muttered. Unlike you? Is that what you're trying to say? He turned his head towards her, noticing she had stopped moving. She didn't face him, but he saw her rub her eye for a moment. Without answering, she continued forward, putting a hand on the doorknob. Izuku shut his eyes tight, gritting his teeth. He had to say something. I was quirkless. Mina froze, the doorknob halfway turned. She slowly turned to face her classmate, a look of utter confusion on her face. Izuku took a second to realize what he blurted out. Crap. Not exactly what he wanted to say. He took a deep breath and gathered himself. Since Bakugo had called him a quirkless loser a few times in front of the CL, he had practiced a cover story in case this topic ever came up. My quirk, he started, looking at his hand. I didn't always have it. Mina was now completely turned around, her hand off the doorknob. It didn't appear until I was done with middle school, actually. Doctor couldn't really explain why. It wasn't a lie, technically. So, I've spent most of my life thinking I was quirkless. The hero in training looked at his feet, partially because he felt bad about lying, but mostly because he was bringing up bad memories. It was rough growing up thinking that. Mina could only imagine. Quirkless people were a rarity to be sure. She wasn't sure if she ever met one, at least one that she knew for a fact was quirkless. But she did know how low an opinion society had of the quirkless. They were treated like second CL citizens at times, as nobody thought they would accomplish anything in life. Was Izuku treated the same ? All my life, I've dreamed of becoming a hero. Even when I was told I was never going to get a quirk, I kept on trying. I knew it was basically an impossible dream, but, he looked up, a more determined look on his face now. Heroes are never supposed to give up, right ? Mina's eyes widened slightly as he said this. Of course, nobody else believed in me back then. A lot kids liked to bully me, and I didn't really have any friends. I mean, who wants to be friends with a quirkless loser, right ? Quirkless loser. Mina had heard Bakugo call Midoriya that more than a few times. She, like many others, hadn't thought much of it. Bakugo said a lot of shit, after all. But hearing this, the two clearly knew each other before UA. Was Bakugo one of the bullies he mentioned ? Her hands clenched into fists once again. If there was one thing she couldn't stand, it was bullies. People who picked on the weak and defenseless, they were basically junior villains. Mina had stood up to a lot of bullies during her childhood. It was one of the things that had made her want to become a hero. She had always taken her quirk for granted. She never once imagined her life without it. After all, everyone she knew had quirks. She couldn't possibly see herself even thinking about becoming a hero if she didn't have one. She couldn't see anyone without a quirk thinking that. But Izuku Midoriya, the student who continued to shock the entire CL with amashing feats, whether it be pushing Todoroki to the brink at the sports festival, surviving an encounter with the infamous hero offer, or of course besting All Might in his final exam, had. Even though it sounded like he had been put down by everyone most of his life, he clearly never gave up on becoming a hero. Heroes were basically his life, everyone knew that. But despite that, I just couldn't give up. There were times when I felt like I should, but then I would remember All Might's words, and how a hero needs to smile, even when things look bad. His voice was getting louder and louder as he spoke, his stutter long gone. All Might. Izuku idolized the man, everyone also knew that. The symbol of peace and justice, who always had a smile on his face no matter what the situation was. He inspired hope for people all across the world. Mina's eyes dropped to the floor as her hands relaxed. Despite not having a quirk, Izuku kept on dreaming. Kept on smiling. How did he do it ? How could he have hope in a completely hopeless situation like that ? But I couldn't do it forever, Izuku said, his voice quieting down a bit. I hit a point in my life where I just couldn't smile anymore. After years of hearing everyone telling you that you can't do something, it gets to you, you know ? Mina looked up, realizing that Izuku was now the one looking at the floor. His face told her that these were some painful memories he was bringing up. I was ready to just fall down and give up. I would never become a hero. Why ? Why was he telling her all this ? The two of them barely knew each other. Why was he spilling his guts like this ? But then, someone caught me, he continued, looking her in the eye once again. Someone told me, despite as absurd as it sounded, that yes, I could become a hero, quirk or no quirk. The fierce, determined look returned to his eyes as he spoke. And if it wasn't for that person, I probably wouldn't be here today. Even though it turned out I did have a quirk in the end. Again, he technically wasn't lying about that. I'm telling you all this, because, he stuck out his arms. I'm here to be the one to catch you. He shouted. I know it's hard accepting failure, but you shouldn't just give up. Mina was stunned. She hadn't seen Izuku this pianate since the fight with Todoroki. And he was this fired up because of her. I honestly think you're one of the strongest students in RCL. Mina thought he might just be saying that to cheer her up, but he sounded so genuine. Because he was. Izuku had always admired Mina's combat prowess, even if she hadn't really gotten a chance to show him off. And her quirk was potentially one of the most powerful in the CL. He was actually grateful he had never had to fight her at the sports festival. He honestly had no clue how he would have a chance, since her acid made melee attacks almost impossible. You might be behind now, but that just means you have to work harder than everyone else. He exclaimed. Those were the words he had to keep telling himself the first few days of CL, when he had zero control over One for All. Work harder, Mina finally spoke, echoing his words. She looked at Izuku, the guy who got into UA with 0 combat points on his entrance exam, who couldn't throw a punch without breaking his arm at first. Now he was one of the top students in both grades and combat ability. Izuku Midoriya, the guy who, despite being supposedly quirkless, never gave on his goal. Mina's whole body tensed up as her eyes shut tight, her hands balling into fists yet again. What the hell was she doing? After everything he had been through, Izuku was still one of the most driven students in the CL. And she seriously considering dropping out of CL over a failed midterm ? You're right. I do need to work harder. She put her hands on her hips, standing to attention as she gave Izuku a look as fierce and driven as the one he had been giving her. How can I be a hero if I'm gonna run away the second things get bad ? A smile appeared on her face. Not another fake, forced smile, but a genuine Mina Ashido smile. Seriously, I don't know what I was thinking. She laughed. In an instant, Mina seemed to be back to her usual, cheery self. Izuku smiled back, relieved that his talk had actually worked. Wow, I had no idea you had gone through all that. Well, it's something I really like talking about. Izuku was also going back to his normal, more timid self. The kind that still struggled even talking to girls. Mina couldn't help but giggle at his sudden shift in demeanor. Well, thank you. You don't know how bad I needed to hear that. Her yellow-black eyes blinked. Well, I guess you did. The two stared at each other in silence for a few moments. Now that they were calming down, Izuku realized he was standing alone in the CL room with a girl he barely knew. Don't mention it, Ashido. His stammering was getting worse, to which Mina giggled again. Izuku felt his cheeks getting warm. Call me Mina. Now his cheeks were getting really warm. Are you two finished ? A third voice made the pair of students jump. Mina whipped around to see Mr. Aizawa standing in the now open doorway. Seriously, I could hear your shouting from my office. Now both students blushed. We're locking up, so you two need to head home. Yes sir. Izuku and Mina spoke in unison, quickly making their way out of the CL room. They had learned by not to ignore their homeroom teacher's orders. Izuku sighed, and started to make his way for the school exit. This had been quite a day, and he was even more ready than before to get home and rest. He felt his entire body go stiff as something warm suddenly slammed into him. It took him a second to realize Mina had practically tackled him into an enthusiastic hug. A hug. Izuku was being hugged. Izuku was being hugged by a girl. The green-haired boy felt like he was on fire as his entire body turned bright red. Who? Be you? Izuku tried to speak, but his brain simply wasn't working right now as it attempted to process the events that were occurring. Thank you. A soft, grateful voice spoke in his ear before he was released. He managed to look at Mina, who was giving him an even more wholesome smile than usual. I mean it. You really are an incredible guy, Izuku. He was still trying to process what had just happened as she walked off. It took several more seconds before he finally felt like he could move. Wait, did she call him Izuku ? Hey, Midoriya. Before his brain shut down a second time, Izuku heard Aizawa's voice. He turned to see the erasure user still standing there, staring at him. Snap out of it and get a move on already. Why yes sir, Izuku exclaimed before literally running off, his fear of annoying his teacher outweighing his embarrassment. As he watched his student run, Aizawa sighed. Those two really are trouble. Despite these words, a small smile appeared on his face. Like Izuku, he too had noticed Mina's demeanor earlier today. And he had also noticed the fact that Izuku noticed. He was going to talk to the pink-haired acid user after CL, but something told him Izuku was going to do it for him. Nice going, kid. Mina had certainly been a difficult student, but Aizawa recognized her potential. She just needed a little more drive to succeed. And if anyone could give her that, it was Izuku. Mina was getting a little sick of Aizawa's logical deceptions. That was not to say she wasn't absolutely ecstatic when her homeroom teacher had announced that everyone was going to the training camp, regardless of their test results. Of course, the cheers of the exam flunkies quickly silenced when it was announced they would be getting additional remedial training, which, as Aizawa practically threatened, would be even more grueling than summer school. Somehow though, Mina wasn't as bothered by that news as she thought she'd be. Nor was she as bothered by the fact that yes, she had dropped down to the lowest CL grade. Everyone had ended up ping the written exams, but as she expected Kaminari had earned a higher score than her, bumping him just past her. Most students would have been devastated by all this. But for some reason, it just made Mina feel even more motivated than ever to improve herself. That just means you have to work harder than anyone else. Izuku's words from yesterday were still fresh in the pink girl's head. She was still feeling pumped by his speech, and hearing that she was getting more work to do was just making her even more determined to prove herself. She was sure she would soon be changing her tune once the remedial training actually started, but she knew it was for her own good. But that wasn't happening yet. For now, she had even more important things to worry about. Such as the CL shopping trip. Mina had been to the Kiashi Ward shopping mall before, but some of her classmates were clearly experiencing it for the first time. She couldn't help but smirk as her peers gawked around at the shopping center, commenting on its size and design. To Mina it was nothing special at this point, but to them it was a completely new experience. Izuku was one such person. Mina wasn't surprised. Given his personality, the guy didn't seem like a very outgoing sort. And now that she knew about his rough childhood, it was even less surprising to hear he had never been somewhere like this. She frowned as she recalled some of yesterday's conversation. To think that anyone would pick on someone like Izuku appalled her. He seemed like such a kind and caring person, never bothering anyone. Then again, it was probably because he was bullied so much that he turned out so meek and shy. It may have sounded rude to call him meek, but it was more or less the reason Mina hadn't ever really talked to the guy. His quiet nature made him easy to ignore, and he seemed to intentionally try to avoid standing out whenever possible. Even his current outfit, a t-shirt and sweatpants, just screamed plain. Besides, he looked like he had made good friends with some of their other classmates, so she didn't feel bad about, for lack of a better word, ignoring him. But yesterday changed that. While it was true Izuku had shown that bolder side of him in the past, seeing it directed at her had really made Mina reevaluate her opinion of him. Not that she thought poorly of him, mind you, but she felt a sort of admiration for him that wasn't there before. It made her want to get to know him better. Besides, he looked completely lost here. With everyone splitting up, he was going to need a guide, and couldn't help but feel like she owed him for everything he did yesterday. She approached the confused-looking student as he was trying to get his bearings, mumbling to himself. Yo, Midoriya, she greeted with a smile. Izuku quickly turned to face her, clearly a bit startled by the acid quirk user's sudden appearance. Once he registered it was Mina, his face turned red. Mina's black, pinky, shirt and jean shorts were a bit more revealing than her school uniform. Plus, that close encounter at the end of their conversation was still fresh in his mind. Hey, Ashido, he stuttered, quickly looking away. Mina raised an eyebrow at this reaction. I said you can call me Mina, she reminded him. Alright, Mina sorry. Mina was still perplexed by his demeanor. She knew he was shy, but normally not to this extent. And he had no problem talking to her yesterday. As she thought of yesterday, she quickly recalled how she had parted with him. A grin appeared on her face. That explained a lot. Hey, I'm not gonna tackle you again, so calm down. Evidently, her surprise hug attack was still on Izuku's mind. Though she shouldn't be surprised, he had turned so red from that she might have mistaken him for her long-lost cousin or something. It hadn't been her intent to make him so embarrassed, she was just excited, and felt a hug was the best way to thank her classmate for everything he did. Though it was a nice bonus. Seeing him this flustered was entertaining to say the least. It also made him look really damn cute. That's not, I mean, did you need something ? Before Mina could fully process that last thought, Izuku turned back to face her, his face returning to normal. I just figured you might want someone to show you around. She threw her arms out, striking some sort of pose. And I just so happen to be quite the expert on all things Kiashi. Izuku looked around the Mive Mall again, then back at his pink classmate. It was true he had no idea where he was going, and the list of supplies he needed for the trip wasn't small. Mina would be a big help, but at the same time Izuku didn't want to be a nuisance. Plus, walking around alone with a girl he barely knew. Izuku felt his cheeks warming up again. Sheesh, you're acting funny today, Mina teased, which didn't help his blush. What happened to that Midoriya I was talking to yesterday ? Izuku shut his eyes and took a deep breath. She was right, he needed to calm down. She was just a classmate who was offering to help show him around. Mina sorry, he apologized. And thank you, but I don't want to be a burden. You can probably cover more ground without me. PFFFT. Mina rolled her eyes. Seriously, are you sure you and that guy the first talked yesterday are the same person ? It's fine, I don't mind giving you a tour. She crossed her arms. Besides, I'd consider us friends after all that stuff you told me, wouldn't you ? And what kind of friend would I be if I left you all alone out here ? Izuku was taken aback by this. It was true that he had said some pretty personal things to her, things he hadn't even talked about with his other friends. But still, hearing this girl who he had basically just started talking to call him her friend was not something he was used to. Not to say he didn't appreciate it. And admittedly, she had been on the back of his mind since last night. He wouldn't mind getting to know her a little more. The quirk inheritor nodded. Great, then let's get moving. Before Izuku could react, Mina had suddenly grabbed his wrist and began walking at a brisk pace, pulling him along. Wait. The feeling of her hand on his arm quickly made Izuku's blush return. Wait, Ashido. Mina, she corrected him, looking back with one of her trademark grins. Now come on. I'll show you one of my favorite clothing stores first, and then. Izuku let out an exasperated sigh as the excited girl listed off store after store. Just what had he gotten himself into ? As the teens made their way to an escalator, neither one noticed a hooded figure that had been observing their conversation. They slowly rose to their feet as they began to follow the pair. It turned out Izuku had gotten himself into a rather fun time. Though it took a little while for him to get over his usual awkwardness, Mina soon had him talking about all sorts of topics as the two got to know each other more and more. As they hopped from shop to shop, the two discussed their quirks, their families, school, hobbies, and much more. They had been able to keep a conversation going for nearly an hour now. Evidently, Mina's seemingly unlimited energy was contagious. Despite the drastically different personalities, the pair had more in common than they thought, mostly when it came to heroes. While nobody could match Izuku's downright obsession with all things hero, Mina came surprisingly close. It had been a while since he was able to discuss stuff like hero comics in such detail without getting weird stares. But in the end, All Might broke out of the hold and finished the villain off in one punch. Izuku excitedly recounted one of the many All Might comics he had read. Yeah, it was awesome. He was all like, Detroit SMMMMAAAASH, and then boom, KO'd bad guy. Mina put on her best All Might impression as she thrust a fist outward, a bag full of camping supplies in her other hand. The two of them laughed. Obviously most All Might stories ended in a similar fashion, but that didn't make them any less enjoyable. I still can't believe you named all your moves after his. She suddenly looked at him with a smirk. You're such a fanboy. Ah, hey. Izuku rubbed the back of his head as he grinned sheepishly. Maybe a little. A little question mark, come on, you freaking idolize the guy. She laughed as she teased him, poking at an All Might patch on his backpack. Izuku responded by quickly trying to cover up said patch, trying to hide his blush. This display simply made Mina's laughter increase, which in turn amplified the All Might fans' embarrassment. Another thing Izuku was quickly learning about his new friend was that she loved to tease. Constantly. They couldn't go 5 minutes without her making some comment that put him in a state like this. Why, you're really enjoying this, aren't you? Izuku asked as he calmed himself down. Sure am. Mina's grin widened. However, it suddenly vanished as something occurred to her. Hey, this isn't bothering you, is it? Izuku looked at her, slightly confused. I mean, you know I'm not trying to make fun of you or anything, right? There was suddenly concern in her voice. The horned girl had gotten so caught up in their conversation she had briefly forgotten Izuku's story from yesterday, and how he had been teased and mocked by his peers for a large portion of his life. Oh no, no. Izuku waved his hands in front of him. I know you don't mean any of it. There was a clear contrast between her playful jabs and the malicious insults Bakugo and his other old bullies would shout. He recognized that. To be honest, I'm kinda glad you're doing it, he admitted. Sure, all the joking made him flustered, but he didn't want Mina to act around him differently just because of his past. After all, he had been treated weird by everyone most of his life. I mean, you wouldn't be saying that stuff if you thought I couldn't take it, right? He looked at her, smiling. Mina quickly understood. He didn't want her to think he was weak. And of course, she didn't. Rather, she now believed he was one of, if not the toughest, bravest person in the whole CL. Certainly more than her. Had she been in his shoes, she would have given up on becoming a hero long ago. Still, it was kind of hilarious to think a guy with a will as strong as his could be so easily tripped up by a few silly comments. Izuku Midoriya was one weird guy. Hey, ain't those UA students? Their conversation was interrupted by a PB. Yeah, I think I recognize them. CL1A, from the sports festival. Another voice cried out. The aforementioned students turned to see a small group of people approaching them. More fans. Mina looked back at her compatriot. Guess that's just one of the many perks of being a UA student, Several more people had also taken notice of them. Yeah, perks, Izuku said reluctantly. He obviously appreciated the praise, but his awkwardness made it tough to deal with all these fans. The two celebrities spent a few minutes talking to the group, getting photos and even signing an autograph or two. Unsurprisingly, Izuku was getting the lion's share of the attention, most of the crowd commenting on his fight with Todoroki. It made sense. That fight was probably the highlight of the event, even more so than the finals. Of course, it only made Izuku's awkwardness with strangers even more apparent as he struggled to converse with everyone. Mina giggled as she signed a child's notebook. He was just so cute. She blinked. There it was again. Where was this coming from? It wasn't like she'd thought of him in this way before. As the fans dispersed, Izuku slumped his shoulders and let out a huge sigh of relief. Man, how do pros handle this every day? He asked nobody in particular. He looked positively drained. The price of fame, Mina nudged his arm with her elbow. You shouldn't be so surprised. With everything you pulled off at the festival, it's no wonder you're so popular. Izuku looked at her. Like I said before, you're pretty amazing. For whatever reason, hearing that from her gave the one-for-all wielder a fuzzy feeling. He felt his face warm up yet again as he looked at her smiling face, and he couldn't help but smile himself. For a few moments, they stared at each other in silence. As he looked, Izuku for some reason found himself drawn into his companion's eyes. Those black and yellow orbs had always intrigued the boy ever since he first saw Mina. As he gazed into them, he could see so much emotion in them. They radiated with that the pink-haired hero in training was known for. They were beautiful. Hello? The snapping of fingers brought Izuku back to his senses. Earth to Midoriya, come in Midoriya. The source of the snapping was Mina's fingers in front of his face. Izuku's eyes went wide. How long was he staring at her like that? His whole face turned red. Sorry, the human tomato hybrid was struggling with words. What were we talking about? I said I was going to use the little girl's room. Mina decided to chalk her friend's behavior up to the nerves he was probably still feeling from the fans. You mind waiting here? I'll be back in a few. Oh, yeah, no problem, Izuku answered as he slowly began to cool down. Mina walked off to take care of her business, leaving him standing on his own. Once she was out of sight, Izuku began to think. What was that about just now? He'd never thought that kind of stuff about someone before, especially not their eyes. Still, the more he thought, the more he started to admit that she was rather pretty. He both verbally and mentally yelped. Where was all this coming from? What was he, Mineta? Was he seriously this awkward when it came to girls? But why didn't he ever think about Uraraka like that? Whoa, you're a UA kid, right? CL1A? A man's voice shook the flustered boy out of his thoughts. Wow, awesome. Can I get your autograph? Izuku sighed, not exactly in the mood to deal with more fans right now. Hey, aren't you that guy who got all banged up by the ice kid at the sports festival? The same voice, suddenly now much closer, continued. Izuku felt his whole body go rigid as an arm was suddenly thrown around his neck. Yeah, that's me. The nervous boy started to sweat a bit. This guy had no concept of personal space. And hold on, didn't you also have a run-in with that hero offer guy, Stain? The man continued. Izuku suddenly felt like he recognized his voice. Why yes, sir. Why you really know your stuff. Why was he getting a bad feeling all of a sudden? Man, you're really something. And to think, I'd be meeting you again here of all places. The voice suddenly took on a more sinister tone. Wait, again? What did he mean by? Izuku let out a small cry as the hand draped loosely over his shoulder suddenly grabbed his neck. This must be fate or something. You seem to be having trouble remembering, but I guess the last time you saw me was at the UA invasion, Izuku Midoriya? The UA student's blood ran cold as he realized what was going on. This voice he recognized, this hand, the USJ. He slowly turned to see the face of the man who had struck fear into CL1A that day. The terrifying leader of the League of Villains, who had nearly offed both Izuku and All Might that day. Even without the hand covering his grinning face, the young hero in training knew exactly who he was looking at. Tomura Shigaraki. Izuku frantically looked around. Nobody had seemed to notice his situation. Act natural, kid. We're just old friends catching up, got it? The villain whispered. I just want to have a little chat, that's all. Yeah, a nice, friendly chat. Shigaraki began walking, taking his captive with him. And don't even think about doing anything funny. Because the second you do, you know what'll happen, right? Izuku gulped. Currently, Shigaraki's hand was clamped around his neck. All but one finger. The moment all of my fingers are touching you, you'll start crumbling from the skin down. Within a minute, you'll be nothing but dust, Shigaraki hissed. Izuku's mind immediately recalled seeing this monster's quirk in action against Aizawa. But if you do, Izuku struggled to speak. You know, a hero eye in this sea crowd will catch you. Of course they will. But look around, kid. The master of the League of Villains gestured to the oblivious crowd around them. Just about everyone here has a quirk that could easily hurt people. Yet none of them seem afraid. Why? Because they think everyone will obey the same laws they do. That nobody would attack so suddenly. He cackled. I could probably off 20, maybe 30 people before someone finally stopped me. Anyone I wanted, really. He leaned in close to Izuku's ear, his next words dripping with malice. Like that pink girlfriend of yours, for instance. The captive's eyes shot open as wide as they could. Had he been following him this whole time? The image of Mina crumbling away flashed through his head. Ashido. He wasn't in the right state of mind to even remotely think about the girlfriend comment. Ashido, What a pretty name. A pretty name for a pretty girl. We wouldn't want to worry about her now, would we, Mr. Hero? Shigaraki's grin widened as Izuku's face went ghost white. They both stayed quiet for a few moments. What What do you want to talk about? Question mark. Izuku knew he couldn't fight this. He'd just have to play along and either wait for an opening, or hope this lunatic would actually spare his life. That's the spirit. Shigaraki laughed once again. A dry, empty laugh. Now let's find a nice, quiet place, shall we? Question mark. Mina wiped her hands on her shirt as she exited the restroom. Seriously, all this advanced technology nowadays, and we still can't get hand dryers that actually work, she grumbled. She checked her phone. Crap. It had been about 15 minutes since she left Izuku on his own. She'd been jumped by a few more groups of fans shortly after parting ways with him. Hope he's not too annoyed. Her shopping companion didn't strike the horned girl as an impatient sort, but she felt bad nonetheless. Fortunately, she avoided running into any more speed bumps on her way back. She quickly returned to where she left Izuku, looking around for her green-haired friend. At first glance, she didn't see him. Midoriya? Question mark. She began to walk around. This was the correct spot, wasn't it? Question mark. She took a moment to check the nearby shops, figuring he had wandered into one while he was waiting for her. She saw no sign of him. The heck? Question mark. Mina's eyebrows furrowed slightly as she folded her arms, pondering where the boy might have gone. Did he also go to the restroom and she just missed him? Question mark. Did he go looking for her, since she had taken so long? Question mark. She didn't think he'd just ditch her for no reason. Unless he thought she had ditched him? Question mark. It was certainly possible. Izuku certainly didn't have the most self-esteem. Did he take her long absence as a way of saying she didn't want to hang out with him anymore? Question mark. The more she thought about it, the more likely it started to seem. Shit, why didn't I get his number? Question mark, she asked herself, widening her search. Exchanging numbers was typically one of the first things she did with a new friend, but for some reason she had been reluctant to do it with Izuku. She wasn't sure what the reason was, but it had stopped her from asking him about it. Why was that? Question mark. Because he was a guy or something? Question mark. But she had Kaminari and Kirishima's numbers, so that didn't make sense. Granted, they weren't as cute as Izuku. She slapped her free hand over her mouth, despite not saying anything. There it was again. Why did she keep thinking this kind of stuff? Question mark. Mina gulped. She was starting to recognize this feeling. She hadn't experienced it in a couple years, but this was typically how a crush started for her. Oh no, she felt heat in her face. Was this really happening? Question mark. Mina? Question mark. Yo, Mina. Hearing her name, Mina quickly abandoned the thought as she looked to see Kirishima. She smiled, waving to her friend. Sup, horn buddy? Question mark. Just checking out shops, figuring out what I still need. The spiky-haired redhead paused. Seriously, I can't believe we're gonna be going to this camp thing after all. Totally sweet, right? Question mark. Well, aside from the whole extra lessons thing, Kirishima's enthusiasm was quickly replaced with slight dread. Oh, don't be like that. The fact that we're going at all is already crazy. Yeah, but still, I'm kind of looking forward to the extra work. Honestly, the hardening quirk user looked at her friend like she had grown a second head. Who are you and what did you do to Mina? Question mark, he asked. You're looking forward to doing work? Question mark. Mina rolled her eyes. Ha ha ha, she fake laughed. Her smile suddenly dropped. Yeah, I actually am. She paused. I kind of had a moment of self-reflection yesterday. Realized I need to make some changes in how I look at things. Before Kirishima could ask more, she decided to change topics. By the way, did you happen to see Midoriya anywhere? Question mark. One was supposed to meet back up with him here, but he's not around. The spiky-haired boy raised an eyebrow. Question mark. Midoriya? Question mark. Since when did you hang out with him? Question mark. Mina's eyes narrowed a bit. What's that supposed to mean? Question mark. Kirishima raised his hands as if to defend himself. Nothing. Just surprising, that's all. You two never really seemed close. Mina closed her eyes, sighing lightly. He wasn't wrong. But yeah, I think I saw him. Looked like he ran into a friend from outside school or something. Mina's eyes opened a bit wider than before. At least I assume they're not from the school. Didn't really recognize him. The boy kept talking, but Mina wasn't paying attention. A friend from outside school? Question mark. But Izuku had told her he didn't really have other friends. The pink-haired junior hero suddenly had a bad feeling. Where did you see him? She interrupted whatever he was saying, her tone less cheery than usual. Oh, he was over that way, Kirishima explained as he pointed in a direction. Something hey, wait. Mina suddenly began fast walking in that direction. Mina, what's wrong? She didn't answer. She couldn't explain it, but something in her gut was saying Izuku was in trouble. After a few minutes, Mina stopped at the top of a staircase leading to a small long area. She scanned it for any sign of her friend. Where are you? Aha. Her eyes rested on a bench a short distance from said lounge, where she spotted a familiar green and black hairdo. Izuku Midoriya was sitting on the bench, with a tall hooded figure next to him. The two seemed to be having a conversation, with the hooded person's right arm around Izuku's shoulder. They were perpendicular to her position, so she was getting a side view of both of them. At first glance, it didn't seem unusual. But as Mina continued to look, she noticed Izuku's face and body language were very unusual. He was very tense, and his eyes occasionally darted around. His face wasn't the usual awkward, nervous one he often wore. The yellow-eyed girl had seen enough of that expression today to know this wasn't tart. This was very different, like he was afraid of something. She saw him shift his body slightly. The figure seemed to respond to this, pulling him slightly closer. In the movement, however, she saw something that told her everything else she needed to know. The hooded person's hand was grasping at Izuku's throat. Mina suddenly found herself leaping at the stairway's railing, and activating her quirk to slide down it like she was grinding on a skateboard. She subconsciously went for the least potent acid she could muster, making it little more than a green goo. This display caused quite a reaction from the dozens of people on the stairway. She slid down the railing, leaping onto the floor below without skipping a beat. There was no thought process behind her actions, her body had simply begun moving on its own. She dashed towards Izuku's captor, readying a fist. What's the difference between you two? Izuku repeated Shigaraki's question back to him. After dragging him off to a somewhat isolated bench, the hooded villain had begun to have his chat. At first, it was a lot of nonsense about heroes, violence, and society. A madman's ramblings, Izuku figured. He only half paid attention, desperately looking for a way out of his situation. If Shigaraki dropped his guard for even a second. As soon as the hero offer came up, though, Izuku had his full attention. As it turned out, Stain had not actually been with the League of Villains. And his notoriety was upsetting Shigaraki. He had expressed dismay that nobody was talking about his villainous acts, whether it was the USJ attack or the Nomu outbreak at Hosu. And so he asked Izuku a simple question. What made Stain different from Shigaraki? You're both villains, and you've both done unforgivable things, but the hero offer, I could at least understand him. He recalled Stain's final words before he was defeated. We were both inspired by All Might. Shigaraki stayed quiet, prompting the boy to continue. He didn't just off because he wanted to. He even saved my life. Despite his fear, despite the sweat on his face, Izuku managed to look the League of Villains leader in the eye. I can't condone his actions, but he lived according to an ideal. For a moment, Shigaraki was stunned. Izuku wasted no time, and tried to pull away. Before he could, the villain suddenly tightened his grip, pulling his captive closer. Ah, now I get it, he muttered. Why both you and the hero offer get me so pissed off. Izuku felt the fingers on his throat digging deeper. It's all about All Might. His hand started quivering slightly. He's the reason for everything. He's why all these people can be so happy and carefree. There was anger in his voice. His fingers dug even deeper, to the point where Izuku was struggling to breath. Abandoning all subtlety, the boy began pulling at Shigaraki's arm, trying to pry himself loose before the villain completely lost it. NNGG. Hey, what do you think you're doing? The madman looked back at Izuku. Didn't I tell you what would happen if you tried anything? Hero? He slowly lowered his final finger towards the boy's throat. Suddenly, his head snapped to his left. Izuku turned to where he was looking. His eyes widened in shock as he saw what had gotten Shigaraki's attention. Let him go, Mina screamed, charging full sprint towards the villain. She was upon him a half-second later, her right fist flying towards his face. It never reached its target though. Izuku felt his entire body lurch as, in the blink of an eye, Shigaraki sprang to his feet, caught the punch with his left hand and swept his attack's legs out from under her. As Mina landed on her stomach, she felt a shoe dig into her back before she could react, pinning her. The color drained from the now standing Izuku's face. Shigaraki's hand was still holding his throat. Hey now, that wasn't very nice, the villain said to Mina, his hand still grasping her fist. A surprise attack like that ? And you call yourself a hero ? Mina was trying to pull away, but the grip held. Izuku saw cracks starting to form on Mina's hand. No. Everything seemed to slow down. Izuku started to reach for the hand around his throat as One for All began to activate. Shigaraki was distracted, and his grip had loosened. He needed to get free. He needed to stop this villain. More cracks were forming. Izuku clenched his teeth as he grabbed hold of the hand and pulled. Even more cracks. Shigaraki's head snapped back to his original target, his eyes manic. Izuku felt the hand's grip on his back tightening again. No. He swore he felt his throat grow dry. Lightning was coursing through him as his power surged. Pieces of Mina's skin were starting to flake away, revealing blood and muscle underneath. Mina. Despite the vice-like grip now on his neck, Izuku still screamed, shutting his eyes. He couldn't bear to watch more. He read himself to unleash the full force of One for All on Shigaraki, not caring about the consequences. Then, without warning, Izuku felt himself falling backwards. He no longer felt skin against his throat. Reacting immediately, he braced and caught himself, panting. Shigaraki was now recoiling away from him and Mina. And he was shrieking in pain. The villain's cry was deafening as he clutched his left hand with his right. Izuku could see what looked like smoke rising from his hand. There was a faint sizzling sound coming from it, and a noxious smell started to fill the boy's nostrils. His gaze turned to Mina, who was now sitting up, her left arm cradling her right hand against her chest. He couldn't see it from this angle. What he did see, though, was a few droplets of greenish liquid falling from it, eating tiny, smoking holes into the floor. Acid. Highly corrosive acid at that. The same acid that was now destroying Shigaraki's hand. He quickly made his way to her, the lightning in his body dissipating as his quirk deactivated. He knelt down so he was eye level with her. Mina? She didn't look up, but spoke. Don't let escape, she spoke through clenched teeth. Her voice was shaky, like she was struggling to say even those words. Escape? His head whipped around. Shigaraki was gone. Izuku stood, frantically scanning for any sign of him. He barely managed to catch sight of a black hood far in the distance before it disappeared around a corner. Damn it. Knowing there was nothing more he could do, Izuku returned his attention to the girl at his feet. He placed a hand on her shoulder. It's going to be fine, help's on the way. He yawed her. From here he was able to get a look at her right hand. From the wrist down, almost all the skin was missing. Blood was starting to soak through her shirt. Man, Mina turned her head up. Her eyes were closed, but Izuku could see she was fighting back tears. Despite the extreme pain she was clearly in, she somehow managed to force a smile. This was my favorite shirt. Izuku could feel tears forming in his eyes. This was because of him. If he hadn't gotten caught, or if he had been able to act a bit quicker. Hey, don't give me that face. Mina's eyes were open now. Heroes need to smile, even when things look bad, right? A tear fell from her eye. She was still shaking in fear. The pain on her face was clear, and yet her smile didn't break. He had said the same thing to her yesterday. Izuku rubbed his eyes with an arm, and forced himself to smile. Why yeah, you're alright. They do. He couldn't keep back his tears for long, but still he kept smiling. Just hold on, okay? The sound of sirens could be heard in the distance. Shigaraki leaned against the alley wall, catching his breath. He had managed to escape the mall and slip into an alley before any heroes or law enforcement arrived on the scene. All that was left was to lay low until the heat was off. He looked down at his left hand. It was covered in heavy burns and blisters. He winced, the pain still fresh. He scratched at his neck with his right hand, eyes twitching as he glared at the burned hand. That damn pink brat, Who the hell does she think she is? He growled. His whole body was shaking. He recalled the name Izuku had shouted. Mina, he practically spat the name out. Mina Ashido and Izuku Midoriya. I swear, the next time I see either of you, his right hand grabbed at a small trash can sitting next to him, which promptly crumbled to dust. I'll make sure it hurts. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.